Welcome to our channel Biology Online. Today we will talk about some major differences between male brain and female brain in case of humans. Before we throw light on these differences, we need to emphasize certain important points. They are, our first point is, although all people have some differences in their brains, but some major differences are rarely gender specific. These differences don't mean something worse or something better at all. And these differences also don't necessarily mean something mutually exclusive structures or functions of our brains. Okay, again, these differences might explain our better career options, expertise, interest, and inclination to specific lines as two different genders. This comparison might also help us to formulate planning at domestic, individual, or society levels, which are gender specific. This comparison too might help us to open new fields to education, to do research, and to know more about our potential gender-specific abilities. Then differences are basically least prominent till the attainment of puberty. And after the age of 13 years, these differences tend to be more prominent and explicit. These differences are basically on the basis of some anatomical structures. There is the structural details, some functional details or biochemical details, or some gender-specific susceptibility to certain medical conditions. Then again, some gross structural details of our brain are as. We have, broadly speaking, from the external morphology, we have got these structures. This is the cerebral hemisphere. This is on one side and another hemisphere is on the other side. So we have got two cerebral hemispheres. This is the cerebellum. And these are some structurally and functionally remarkable structures of our cerebral hemispheres. This is called as frontal lobe, and this one is called as occipital lobe. This is the parietal lobe. This is the parietal lobe. This is the temporal lobe over here. And this is of course cerebellum. This one over here is the brain stem. Okay, certain other structures which can be viewed there as. This structure is thalamus, and below the thalamus is space called as hypothalamus. Then amygdala lies over here, for example. We have got one more structure which is helpful in comparison, that is over amygdala over here, for example. And behind the amygdala there is hippocampus, which is over here. This is the brainstem, of course. And for example, this is the cingulate gyrus. A hemicircle or an arc runs over this thalamus is the cingulate gyrus. Then this is hypothalamus shown over here. There remains an endocrine gland hanging from this hypothalamus, we call that as pituitary gland. Moving on, the comparison. Men have 10% larger brains than those of women. It is basically in due proportion to their bigger body sizes. This, however, doesn't mean that men have a higher IQ and women have comparatively smaller brain because of their smaller body size. The next point is, men have 6.5 times more gray matter, hence they are task focused. And women have 10 times more white matter, and they tend to be multitasking, although this focus will be a bit compromised or minimized in women. We can see there are some details shown over here. This is our structure of our brain, for example. Outer periphery of our brain is made up of cytons of the neurons, and this is called as gray matter. Whereas inside of the brain, that is formed by the axons of neurons, that is formed by axons, and this is called as white matter. Okay, then next point is like this. Men tend to use mostly their left side of the cerebral hemispheres for performing different cognitive functions, whereas females, they tend to use both the sides of their brain to perform different functions. Hence they process information and generate motor signals and interpret certain stimuli to greater extent when compared with males. Okay, moving on. The next point is men have verbal centers in their left hemisphere of the brain only, whereas females have these verbal centers in both the cerebral hemispheres. That's why women tend to be more vocal. They can narrate situations at lengths, and they can phrase, synthesize phrases, sentences, and have more vocabulary as compared to men. The next point. There are more connections in men running from front to back of their brain, and hence they have greater synergy between perception and action, and they tend to solve their problems directly without intuition at all. So it means things like this, for example. The connections in the brain are running like this, for example, front to back, for example, like this, like this. But in women, what we see, the connections are running this way, left to right or right to left. So in women, there is a combination of logic and intuition because both the cerebral hemispheres are involved simultaneously for performing any cognitive function. Okay, this is one more difference. Then moving on, there are certain specific areas in female brains which have more blood supply when compared with males. And because of this very important difference, females tend to be more empathetic, more collaborative and intuitive. But this has some payoff as well. Women are more susceptible to anxiety, depression and eating disorders when compared with males. Okay, one more difference lies there. Men have a larger amygdala. Amygdala is shown over here in the diagram, in the green colored structure over here in the diagram. This is amygdala. It is bigger in men. That's why they are aggressive when they have some emotional stress situations. Whereas on the flip side, females have a larger hippocampus. Hippocampus lies just behind the amygdala, and they are better in critical thinking, critical learning, memorization, and explaining their emotions at length. The next point is like this. Men have more serotonin levels in their brain. And that's why they tend to be more stable, positive thinking and optimistic. Now serotonin is basically a neurotransmitter, a chemical which is used to send signals between adjacent neurons of the brain. Women have lesser serotonin levels. The next point is men have a larger hypothalamus. Hypothalamus, as we have mentioned, lies below the thalamus, and they can better regulate their biological drivers, for example, hunger, thirst, sex drive, etc. On the flip side, women have a larger corpus callosum. Corpus callosum is basically a nervous band which joins two cerebral hemispheres. You can see it is shown over here, for example, this band is shown over here. Now, since these cerebral hemispheres are joined by corpus callosum and is bigger in women, so there is processing of information with the greater pace in case of women when compared with males. Okay, the next point is like this. There's a larger frontal cortex in case of men. That's why they have better problem solving mechanisms, decision making, personality development and certain abstract reasoning. On the flip side, women have larger limbic cortex or limbic system. This system which is helpful in maneuvering behavioral and emotional responses. So this very system enables women to do these behavioral and emotional responses in a better and comprehensive way. Okay, now this limbic system comprises of amygdala, some of the portion of amygdala, thalamus, okay, and hippocampus. Now, what does this thalamus do basically? Thalamus is used to relay motor and sensory signals between adjacent neurons of the cerebral hemispheres. So, since this system is bigger in women, they can better send and receive signals between different parts of the brain. That's why they process information, they relay the information with great versatility as compared with males. Okay, then one more difference lies here. Men have a larger parietal cortex of cerebral hemisphere that's shown in orange or here. Because of it, they have larger, space perception, better space perception while they are driving, riding, or swimming. On the flip side, women have 12% more neurons in their brains. Although other cells of the brain may be less in number, for example, the cells we call them as packaging cells or glial cells, they are smaller in number, but these neurons are larger in number, that is 12% more than those of men. Okay, this is a typical neuron shown in the diagram, this over here. And this neuron, you can see the anterior part that's called as cell body or cyton, and this lengthy string-like structure is called as axon. Okay, moving on. One more difference lies in cerebellum. Cerebellum is the posterior part of the brain. It again has two lobes, and these two lobes are connected by more connections in case of men. That's why they have better motor coordination when compared with females. And men tend to be more drivers, pilots, or engineers. Whereas females, they tend to be less drivers, engineers, or pilots. Then lastly, there are some medical conditions which can be compared between the two sexes. Whereas men are more likely to be diagnosed with alcoholic dependence, whereas females, they are 2 times more likely to be developing depression. Okay. Then one more difference lies here. Men are 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorders. They can be murderers, and they can be, burglars or rapists. On the other side, women have 2 times more likelihood of developing Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is a progressive neurological disorder that causes the brain to shrink and atrophy, and the cells will die out with the progressing, years of age. Okay, the number difference lies here. Males have 4 times more likelihood of developing autism. That's again a brain condition that impacts how you perceive and socialize with others. Whereas females have 4 times more likelihood of developing multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis is basically an immunologically sponsored autoimmune disorder in which our myelin sheath of neurons is attacked, and it affects our communication between brain and other parts of the body badly. And one more difference lies there. Men have 2 times more likelihood of developing Parkinson's disease. That's again a progressive nervous system disorder that affects our movements badly, adversely. And women have more likelihood of having a stroke. Okay, these were some prominent differences between human male and human female brains. Wish you all the best.